Hey there, everybody. This week is class 2, and I titled this one Intro to Houdini, although I know we kind of did an intro to Houdini last week. Um, but the thing that we're going to focus on this week, I really only have one item here, which is creating and manipulating objects in Houdini. And we've already talked about a little bit about that last week, but I want to go in more detail here. And the most important thing is understanding the structure of Houdini, which again we talked about a little bit last week, but we're going to really detail it here in terms of how you should be laying out scenes and how these nodes can possibly communicate with each other. So last week and this week, so basically our first 2 weeks of the semester, it's going to be very important that you feel comfortable working in Houdini. Now that's not doing everything, because quite honestly, you can never learn how to do everything in Houdini. I've been using Houdini for 5 or 6 years now extensively, and there are still major parts of Houdini that I haven't touched because it's just so extensive. But understanding the basic concepts is really important, and that's what will get you to be able to branch out into other areas. So what I'm going to focus on here today is the geometry node and building geometric objects, complex geometric objects out of simple primitives, otherwise known as solid modeling in the CAD and CAM industries. So we're going to take a look at that, and then for your homework, just to solidify these concepts, I want you to find a photo reference of some type of building structure. And I want you to recreate that object in Houdini using just the primitive shapes. And I have another note here. Keep in mind that success is in the details. And in particular, and I'll give you an example of this in a minute, the transition from one plane to another. So let's say like a floor plane to a pillar. Obviously that can be a plane and a cylinder. However, there's a transition between the two, where the two meet. And where they meet, you want to put something else in that place, a transitional shape. And we could do something like a torus maybe. And I'll give you an example of that. So when you're done modeling your project, I want you to submit the HipNC project. I call it HipNIC. This is the format that we have when we're working with the Houdini Education and also Houdini Non-Commercial or Houdini Apprentice. So I want you to submit the Houdini file along with your photo reference so we can see how close you got to your photo reference, and also just a screenshot of your Houdini file. So I want the Houdini file, a screenshot of the Houdini file, and the photo reference. So you're going to be submitting 3 files basically. And this will be due before the start of next class. Now again, we need to make sure that we feel comfortable just with the basics of Houdini after this week, because we're gonna step into simulation next week. We're gonna start into rigid body destruction. And so we need to really be comfortable here. So I also I gave you lots of additional videos here to watch if you're still feeling uncomfortable on Houdini. And they go from the basics, here are the Houdini interface, scene navigation, key concepts and hierarchies, understanding proceduralism, and what else do I have here? Attributes, selecting objects and components. So these will all help you. I would recommend maybe just watching these. Watch all of these, then create your structure. All right, so I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to come over here to Houdini, which I have up and running. And we talked a little bit about creating objects. So right up here along the top in our create menu, we have our box, sphere, tube, torus, and grid. But what you'll probably find is you'll start to just create things in your network view down here. Now I can right click in here, and let's see, it's getting cut off, but there's the primitive menu down here. But actually the way we work, I want to start to get us into the typical structure we would do. So up here at the top level, you can think of any node that's created up here at the top level as a container. So of course, well, let me go ahead and use the shelf tools instead. So I could create a box. I'm going to control click to just place one at the origin. And then I could create, well, let me do that example I was just talking about the successes in the details. So I could put down a grid. So there's my grid. I could then do a, excuse me, a tube. Now a tube is open. It has an open top on it. Now, in order for me to change the shape of that tube, I have to go into its geometry node. So here's the tubes node right here. So I'm going to double click on it. And in here, I have some options like end caps. There we go. Now it's capped off. And if I want it to be smoother, I could come in here and change the rows and columns. That'll make it smoother. And so that would be my pillar. Now, you have to be careful too, because in here I could change the height in here, which is a little different. That's different than going up to the object level up here and actually scaling it right there. As a matter of fact, in a few minutes we'll talk about this. We don't really want to do any translating or rotating or anything up here at this top level, because that can get us in trouble down the road. We want to do mostly all of our manipulating inside the geometry network itself. So again, that's why we want to start thinking about these geometry network nodes as containers. So I'll just jump back in there and just make a couple refinements here. So I'll change the height, excuse me, and then I'm going to change the center. This would be moving it. So I can do this a couple ways. I can select my my manipulators over here, or another really cool feature of Houdini is if you hover over any attribute or parameter, if you middle click on it, it gives you what's called the ladder. Now it's up and down, I guess that's why they call it the ladder. And this allows me to, these basically act as slider bars. So I can say, do I want to change the center Y position by 0.1 degree or 1 degree? See how there's 1 and there's 0.1. I use that feature a lot. I very rarely actually use the manipulators in the viewport. I do most of my work over here using this middle click ladder tool. So I'll move that up to there. So that's where I want it. Now I'll come back up to the top level, the object level, and I'll go ahead and control click and place a torus. And so you can see here when I say successes in the details, what we're referring to is how this looks better than if I turn the torus's display flag off down here. If I turn this off, see that doesn't look as good as this. So it's a transitional shape. So when you're doing solid modeling, we add a lot of these transitional shapes, and you know you can be creative with them. So that's what I was referring to here in the lesson plan when talking about our assignment, that to keep in mind that success is in the details, thinking about transitional shapes between two existing shapes. Now, what I just did here is not very efficient. Building up here at the top level. So a better way to work is if I want to make, let's say this is my structure. A better way to work is to build this all inside one geometry network. So instead of up here at the object level, we have our grid, our tube, and our torus, and that makes my structure. I have one geometry node, and I call it structure, and I build the entire structure inside that one geometry node. That's the more accepted way to work. Now, Houdini allows you to work however you want. If you want to work this way, that's fine. But again, remember I said you don't want to really do much manipulating, translating, rotate, and scale at this top level. Technically, you can translate and rotate without too much problem, but scale will get you in a lot of trouble when you start adding or detailing, manipulating inside that geometry network. So we almost always do to be safe, we do all of this inside the geometry network. And up here, these are just containers. So let me start over. I'll just select all these nodes and delete them. And I'm going to build this in a more efficient manner. All right, now before I do that, I'm going to do some rearranging of my interface here because I'm really cramped in this recording area. So this gives us some idea of how we can customize our interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one long column. So there's these little arrows here will allow me to combine the two like that. And then I'm going to split this view vertically. So it would be split pane left right. I'm clicking on this little button right here, split plane left and right. Now I have two views, and on this view I'm going to come up here to where it says scene view, and I can right click on that and then tell it that to be my network view. So now my network view, which was down here, is now here, and my parameter view is right next to it. That'll give me a little more working space. So what I'm going to do is, let's say I decide, okay, I'm going to make a building structure. So the first thing I'm going to do is right click in here, go to geometry, and put down a geometry container or node. So there's my geometry node. Now this is empty. There's absolutely nothing inside there, but it's a container. So I'm going to rename it. I'll call it, let's call it column structure. Column structure. Now I'm going to go into that node and start building my structure. I'm going to do it all in one geometry node instead of having a bunch of geometry nodes up here. And the reason, one of the other reasons for this is that we have more nodes for modeling objects inside the geometry node or network. Again, this is a SOP level, SOP, SOP, surface operator. So inside this SOP node, I have a lot more nodes in there that will allow me to build more sophisticated objects. I don't have that available to me up here. All right, so I'm going to jump in there, and I'm going to build the same thing again. So inside here, now I can't use the shelf tools now. If I use the shelf tools, it's going to jump me back up to the object level and then put the box, sphere, cube, or torus, or whatever in a new geometry node. So when I'm working this way, in my own geometry network, I need to do everything with the right click menu. So I'll right click, and down at the bottom it's being cut off is the primitives menu. And there are actually more primitives in there than what we have up on the shelf tools. So I have a box, cube, grid, sphere, torus, tube, and a few others. So I'm going to go ahead and put the grid down. So when I select it from here, it wants me to drop it before it actually draws it. So there's my grid. Now this is also a better place to work because here's my grid and I have its parameters available right there. So if I need to reshape it, I have it all here. Whereas at the top level, if I wanted to gain access to the rows and columns and things like that and what type of primitive it is, I have to jump in here, edit it, then jump back out. So that makes working this way more efficient right out of the gate. So there's my grid. And then I'm going to keep the grid the way it is. But actually the nice thing about working at this level is when you first put down a new primitive, you have well, it's called the show handles tool, and this would be the equivalent of Maya's universal manipulator. So I can move it here. Now when I'm moving it here, you'll see I'm actually changing its center. So everything that's being manipulated at this level can be seen over here in the parameter panel. So I'll set that back to 0. And let's see. And then I also have these little handles here, which will, oh, that's not the one I want. Let me get right there. I can actually resize it here too. If I hold down the shift key, I can resize it from both directions at the same time. That's with the shift key. All right, so I'm going to leave my grid the way it is there. And then I'm going to add another object. Let's see, we had the tube, right, was the next one. So I'll do my primitive tube. Now I'll put the tube down. Now the problem here is that when we are inside a network like this, the geometry network, we can only see one object at a time. Now I do have another button here, or another flag right here. The first flag here, the rightmost flag is a display flag. Then the one right next to it is the reference flag. So if I want to see a reference of something while I'm working with a different object, I can just add that. So here I can work on the tube, but I can still see a reference to the grid object. Or one thing we did already cover last week is, in order to see both of these together, as I start to combine my primitives to create a more complex shape, we do that with what's called the merge node. And for this one, I'll just start typing it in. MER for merge, and right there it is. And then I can wire these two together, put my display flag on the merge node, and now I can see them together, and I can always come back and work on them by just selecting them. Not putting my display flag on them, I'm keeping my display flag on the merge node. I can just select each node, and then my manipulator and my parameter list here will show me whatever object I have selected. So I'm going to work on the tube with this one. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to introduce us to an expression, our first Vex expression. Again, Vex is the programming language for Houdini. So what happens here is, if I change the height of that tube, we can see it changes from its center of origin, which is fine. We could certainly change the pivot to be at the base, and then it would scale up. But there's a kind of a workhorse expression that we use all the time in Houdini. So if we think about this, the height, since it's being calculated from the origin, which is right in the center, the height is actually half of the object. If we cut the object in half of that height would be on top, half of it on the bottom. So if we think about that, we can leverage that mathematical concept there. So what if I doubled the height? Okay, so now it's twice as tall, but I alter its center to be at 0.5. Or actually, I think I need to make it 1, because I've made the height 2, so the center would be half that 1. Now it's resting back on the plane. Well, I can connect these two together with a Vex expression to do that mathematical calculation. So basically what I'm saying is, every time whatever my height is, I'm going to change my Y direction, which is up on center here, right there, the middle one. I'm going to take the height and divide it by 2, or multiply it by 0.5. Multiplying by 0.5 is the same as dividing by 2. All right, so let's try that. So I'm going to take the height, I'll set that back to 1, I'll set the center back to 0. And what I'm going to do is, I want to copy the height. I want to copy the height parameter. And I can do that by right-clicking on its name and choosing Copy Parameter. Then I'm going to come up to the center. I'm going to remove the 0, so there's nothing there. Nothing in it yet. And I'm going to right-click in here, and I'm going to do Paste Relative Reference. Paste Relative Reference. So you can see what it's now done is it said, okay, I'm going to take the channel height and put that into the center parameter. So whatever the height is, that's what my center is going to be. Now, we already said that in order for this to move, to keep the base on the ground, we need to divide it by 2. Or, so I do divide by 2, or a better expression is we would do multiply by 0.5. And actually in Houdini, most of the time we do 0.5. Oops, 0.5. Or you could just do 0.5. But we do 0.5 because it's easier to read than if I take the 0 out. Then the multiply, which is the asterisk key, and the period get kind of muddled together. So we, just for readability purposes, we do 0.5 if we're doing decimal places. So I'm taking the height and I'm halving it. And watch what happens here now when I change the height value. It pushes right off of the base. All right, so that's much easier than changing the height and then adjusting the center Y direction. So we use that one a lot. So again, it's I'm copying this parameter, pasting a relative, right-clicking up here, pasting a relative reference, and then adding a little more mathematics to it, which is just simply halving it by multiplying by 0.5. And once you get used to that process, you can set these up very quickly. And this is a great way to be able to get objects to keep their base on the ground, and then you can just use their height to move them how you want. All right, so now I'm going to add another object. I'm going to do my transitional detail, which is the torus. So I will right-click in here, and I'm going to just type it in now. I'm going to do torus. There it is. I just put TO, and torus came right up. So there's my torus. Now I need to put this into the merge. Or if you want to string your merges together to do different layers, you can do that too. So I could just wire the torus in right here, or I could say, okay, this is my base object, and so I'm going to do another merge to bring the torus in. So I'll do it both ways. So how am I doing on time here? I'm only at 20 minutes, so merge. So I could do this, and now I'm working my way down in the details. And another really cool thing you could do here is, let me pull this out. I need to have enough room. As you start to build these objects, you can select nodes and group them using the network box right here. So if I select these nodes and I put a network box around them, I could now call this part here. I could say right here I can type in. If I double click, I can type in, and I'll call this the structure base. So that's my structure base. And then this next one will be, when I start building in here, I could put another network box around this, and this would be my structure details. It's always very important to not only name your nodes in a logical fashion, but then to also add network boxes so you know where certain procedures have been done, because your node networks can get massive. And for your own benefit, when you come back a month later and don't remember how you did it, or you're handing it off to another Houdini artist in the team, this helps them understand what's happening much faster. Now, I think this is a little excessive in terms of organization, so I'm going to remove the network box. I'm going to remove this merge node, and I'm just going to merge my torus right into here, like that. Now with the torus, I can get in here and maybe change this a little bit. This might be too big of a transitional shape, so I might bring, let's see, this radius down a little bit. Again, I'm middle clicking and using the parameter ladder. So I'll just make it really small there. All right, and that gives me my object. Oh, now on my tube, I didn't cap the tube. So let me come back to the tube. I'm going to look at its parameters. Now, for some reason, some of these primitives, when they're first created, their default is, in this case, it's a polygon. The torus is a polygon. The grid is a polygon, but for some reason the tube is set to primitive, which is more or less a NURBS object. So I'm going to change that to polygon also. Most of the work, actually all the work we're going to do in here when we get into rigid body destruction and things like that, we have to be working with polygon objects, not NURBS. So I'll switch that to polygon. I'll cap the ends. I'll add a few columns to it just to make it a little smoother, and then I have my structure. So you can see how building a structure, or in our case, some type of primitive shape, primitive object, or an object using primitives, otherwise known as solid modeling, how it's more effective to do it in here than to do each one in their own separate geometry node up at the scene level. So now I'll show you how it gets to be even more, it's more efficient to work in here. So let's say we want to take this column and we want to distribute it across the grid. Right now we just have one. Well, we can do that. I'm actually going to have to tear things apart a little bit here. So my tube and torus are the column. Actually, I'm going to add one more in here. I'm going to add a cube on top of it. So I'll do one more primitive shape. I'll add a cube. And I'll wire that cube in. And with the cube selected, I'm going to move it up. So I'll take its center, Y, and move it up. And I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Now, since I have the Show Handles tool selected here, I can actually resize it right in here. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key to resize it left and right proportionally there, and then forward and back here. And maybe I'll just move the top down a little bit. All right, so that's going to be the top of my column. So now I decide, and actually the torus might need to be, I might need to increase that a little bit. It looks a little too small down there. There we go. All right, so now I want to disperse the tube, torus, and box across the grid. So I have to do a little bit of reworking here. I think I need to do two different sets of merges. So what I'm going to do is remove the grid from here, and we can cut this wire by holding down the Y key. Y as in yes. I can't think of any other Y. Yellow, that's another one too. So I hold down the Y key, it gives me a little scissor, and if I left click and drag, I can cut that line. So I'm going to move that somewhere else. So this is basically my column here. So let's go ahead and put a network box around that. Okay, so we'll do it this way. So I'll call this column. So that's my column. All right, so now I'm going to merge that onto the grid. So I'll drop down another merge node, and I'll merge these together. There we go. All right, I'll put my display flag on the merge node. So now what I've done is I've isolated these that I can now make copies of these and move them around. And we do that with the transform node. So I'm going to right click and type in TRAN for transform. There's my transform node. Now what I can do is I can use a whole series of these transform nodes to move copies of this object around. All right, so I'm going to wire my transform node in here. And this is, let me move this over a little bit. So on this first transform, actually I'm going to cut this wire too. So I'll hold down Y and cut that wire, and I'll just wire in my transform. Now you notice that these wires are crisscrossed now because I put the transform in second, so it goes from left to right. The order doesn't matter, but if you want to keep the wires from crossing, you can go to your merge node, and in its parameters, we can just shuffle these around. See how the grid is first, then the transform? I can just hit the little arrow and reshuffle those. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my transform, I'm going to highlight the transform, and I'm going to just move that entire network of cubes of these primitives over to here. And now what I can do is I can put down another transform node, which will create another copy of all of these items, and I can move that somewhere else. So I'll do another transform right here, and I'll wire that in. And then I will, because you can see I can split the stream. And then I'm going to wire this into my merge. And again, the wires are crossed, so I'll just move the transform up. So now with this transform, I can move it over to here. Just get that in place. Now there's more precise ways of copying, but for what we need to know for this class this semester, we're going to stick with just, hand placing these. So you get the idea now. So I can make as many of these columns as I want. So I have 2. And actually, let's see, I could take these 2 transforms and I'm going to copy them, Control C. Or actually, I can even just hold down the Alt key and drag, and it will drag out the copies of those. So now I already have the connections made. They're in the proper Z position. I'll just have to reposition their X. So now you can see how this proceduralism of Houdini's nodes gets to be very advantageous. And I can also wire multiple nodes into a merge node at the same time. If I have both of these selected and I grab their little output pin, it's going to allow me to connect both of those in at the same time. And again, I'm just going to go to the merge node and I'm going to move my grid to the bottom so the wires aren't crossed. So now on these 2 transform nodes, I just simply need to move them over to here. Select the second one and move it over to here. And very quickly, I'm starting to create a structure. Now, what I probably want to do is I would probably want to name these transform nodes so I know which one is which. So this first one is, let's just call this, we'll just call it column 1, and I'll just copy that. So that's column 1. Now you notice once you rename a node, right above it, it will still maintain what type of node that is so that you don't forget. See, it says transform here, but as soon as I change a name from transform, it will say, okay, well, I'm going to keep a reference so you remember what kind of node this is. So I'll come in here and I'll paste and just make that 2. I'll come over here, paste, make that 3, and paste and make that 4. Again, always want to name them. And there is my network for creating this column structure. So again, you can see how much more efficient this is. So again, the main nodes in here that we're working with, and the main nodes you'll probably work with for your project will be the primitives, merge, and transforms. That'll be all you really need to build some fairly complex structures. And the last thing that I want to talk about here, and I mentioned this briefly last week, is working at the component level. So right now we're working at the object levels here. And the way we work, actually this is another advantage of working inside a network here. So if I decide I want to build another piece to this, but I want to sort of do it off on its own, and then add it into the network, I can just kind of move myself into an empty area here. And I'm going to create, I'll create a cube, another cube. So here's my new cube, and I'm going to put my display flag on it. So now I have no reference to any of those other objects. Of course, if I wanted to reference them, I could turn on the reference flag. Now I just want to take a look at working at the component level, because this will help you reshape stuff a little bit too. So with my box object selected, here's where I can access its component levels. I think I can also get them. Oh no, those are objects. Sorry, that's not. I haven't used that up there. I don't actually use this menu much. But here are my component levels. So as I think I mentioned last week, Houdini calls these are different. So the primitive level is the face level. That's the polygon level. So in Maya, we call it the face level. In Houdini, it's called the primitive level. The top level, where it's the entire object, is called the object level. So we have object, primitive, edges, and points. Whereas in Maya, we have object, face, edge, and vertex. So they're just named a little differently. So if I say I want to work at the primitive level, I can come in here and select the individual polygons. Now I can only do this. Oh, well, no, actually, Shouldn't matter if my secure selection is on or not. But sometimes if you can't select things, just keep an eye on that. Actually, I'm going to go to my select tool instead. I was on the show handles tool. If I want to manipulate at the component level, we typically want to come in here and select. See, now I selected that top face, or this one, or this one. Or I can come over here and say I want to select edges instead. So now I'm selecting edge components. And then of course I can go to points. And now I'm selecting the individual vertices. So I'm going to go to the edge level here and select that edge. And with that edge selected, I can then switch to my move tool. Now, as soon as I switch to my move tool, you'll notice that Houdini put down an edit node. So everything that you're going to do now will be recorded in that edit node. Now it looks like it's working at object orientation. See how it's off the edge, which is great if I want to move it at a 45-degree angle. But if I wanted to move this straight out, I probably want to switch my orientation. And we talked about this last week also. Right in the center here, if I right click, I can say align handle, and here's where I can change it. So I'm going to change it to world. And now I can move that edge out. So now I am actually manipulating the shape of that primitive object. So maybe I'll do that with the other side too. I'll select the other side and move it out to get kind of a keystone shape. All right, so that's how we work. Can we do this if I right click? Can I go to the, let's see, points? I go to select. Component groups. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't know if maybe we had a dropout here that allows me to select the different levels. So actually I can get them right here. There they are. There's point, edge, and primitive. Or you can just get them from here, point, edge, primitive. All right, so that's how we work at the component levels. So now if I want to move this entire face, I could select, I'm at the primitive level, select that face, go back to my move tool, and now I'm moving that entire face. And this is all contained in an edit node. So that's how we manipulate the component levels. So now what I can do is I'll come out of the component level here, and I'm going to take this object and I want to move the entire object. I want to make it part of that network. So I'm going to come back up to the box level here. Actually, no, at this point, we want to add a transform node to get it over with the other objects. So, I mean, I could come back up to the box level here and move its centers right there with the manipulator. See, it's going to move it, but it's probably better, since there's an edit node already here, to go ahead and drop down a transform node. So I'll put another transform in right there. And now I'm going to be transforming the entire object. So what I'll do is I'll zoom back out, and I want to get this into my network now. So I'll take these nodes, bring them over. I'm going to add them. I'll add them down here. Do I want to do this? This is going to become part of the column, let's say. So I'm going to put this up here in the column box. So we'll go in here. Let's move these around a little bit. And I'm going to put these into this merge node. I might need to make my network box a little larger now, and just do some housekeeping here. Put this merge node down like this, and there we go. Okay. So now if I put my merge node or my display flag here, I can that now gives me reference to be able to use my transform node over here to get this where I want it. So let's put it up on top of this object, top of the column. All right, like that. And it's probably not, I might want to make it bigger. So now I could come back to my edit node, here. And I can make it larger. Or actually what would even be better here now is I do another edit after the transform. Would probably be better. So I'm going to come back to my select tool. Let's say I need it to be wider. So I'm actually going to take this face here and move it out to meet that. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Select this face and move it out to that side. And it looks like the back needs to come out a little bit, so I'll move that one back. There we go. So now I have two edit nodes. The original shape, then I've transformed it, and now I applied another edit at for the component level. And now if I come all the way down to the bottom, we see that that has propagated itself out into all of these transforms. Where did I have the transforms? I think I had those outside of the network right here. There we go. So there's my network for creating this structure, this column structure. All right, so I think I will stop there. Hopefully this will be a nice guide into how you can use these nodes to really start building sophisticated objects with primitives very quickly. And this is starting to unfold the power of Houdini. So I will stop there, and I will see everybody today at 1 o'clock in Teams. Remember, we're meeting at 1. You're going to watch this video from noon to 1, and then we're going to meet in Teams at 1.